This is the first Prosody 16 of 2026 with Eleanor McCaughey. It was recorded on the day before the deadline for the Bursary Award by the Arts Council. So there was a lot of anxiety in the air, a lot of apprehension of this impending deadline. So, of course, we talk about debt, we talk about religion, we talk about being an artist in the world and how that world, in so many ways, affects how we make work, especially illness and family. I hope you enjoy. So you're applying for the bursary today? Oh yes, it's tomorrow, isn't it, the deadline?
It's tomorrow. Yeah. It's a tough one. You start internalizing everything and you go, if I put this image portrait instead of landscape, maybe I have a better chance.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Listen, like I've been on panels before in the Arts Council, and it really comes down to the panel at the end. And it's a kind of lottery in terms of the conversations that take place on that panel. So when I experienced it as a panelist, I was like, oh my God, like this is crazy because it's good. Like it is a good process. I would say that. But there's so many people going for bursaries. There's different people on the panel every year. They all have their own subjectivities in terms of what they like, what they've seen in the world, actually. Really? As real work, not just as a digital image. But that's what was interesting to me. So they're making judgments based on a digital image. So there's a lot of variables in the judging. Now it is very rigorous, and there's discussions and there's debates and there's all that stuff going on in the background. And the people on the panel are artists generally, and they really want to fund. It's just, who do you fund out of the hundreds? Out of the hundreds that are going for it, So it's tough. And it's not really like, as from the outside you say, oh, the same people are getting it, and sometimes that is the case, but their trajectories in a different way, I suppose. They're, it's all about trajectories and all this kind of weird stuff. So listen, it's always go for it because you just don't know.
Yeah, I've kind of stopped taking rejection personally. I think as soon as you kind of separate yourself from, because there's just so many things that you can't control. You can't control who's on the panel. Your work is your work, and you can't change it. Like, you can't change it the week before. Make a whole new body of work.
Yeah. And it is, as you say, it's all that internalization of, am I doing the right work? And, you're questioning that all the time. That's tough as well. Because it brings you out of the studio into this space where you're judging your own work from an objective point of view, which can be really bad for artists because they should be just making the work and not thinking about whether it's good or bad or whatever.
Yeah, it's because it destroys studio practice. If you're thinking, is this any good? You can't see your work. Like I always said, if I could have one superpower, it would be to remove myself from my work and see it for the first time. Sometimes I Google lens a painting to see what throws up, just to kind of see, oh, so this is what Google Lens sees my work similar to. It's the only way I can do that.
Yeah, I've asked artists that question actually in conversations, and it's really tricky. I kind of asked them, well, what do you see in the work? You know, and it's true. They find it really difficult to answer that question because I was listening to Helen Molesworth and Luke Timons in conversation through that David Schwerner podcast. It was really interesting what he was saying. As someone who seems to have a very good, nearly, he calls himself, he's perceived as arrogant in terms of what he knows about his own work, like, you know, objectively. And he said he'd love to become demented and come back and see his work without any memory, without any, just to see what he would think of it as a, you know,
Yeah,
that's what his.
yeah, totally.
So I think all it's a really tricky thing, and it's such a brave thing actually to be an artist. I know I'm using that's a slippery word, but it's kind of they're throwing work out there in the present tense, and they really don't know what it is really, because they've been working through it through this durational process. That's all about accidents, and it's all about things happening day on day, and it's, you know, it's kind of interesting, you know, going back to Luke Timons, like where he has rules where he won't sleep on a painting. That is kind of, he doesn't want to wake up the next day and change it. That he'll finish a painting in a day, which is an interesting rule, you know.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how we put these rules on ourselves? It's like because there's so many possibilities. Sometimes you have to rein it in, you know, like you have to kind of construct this system for yourself, because otherwise, like for me, I have a tendency to uh, just make every idea that I have, you know. But lately that's been really hard because it's been show after show after show, and I made the decision now to just like that's it. This is my last show now for the foreseeable future. Like I've no deadlines now. It's the most incredible feeling. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to just kind of reading and going down rabbit holes, and yeah, it's going to be great.
And that's good because it's a good segue into the text, because you talk about deadlines. And I might read that out first and just kind of try and describe, because like I find these conversations with artists, I need to create an anchor, and usually the image and the text is the anchor, and then we can spread out from that image and text. But you bring up that deadlines. So I'm just going to read out the text, and then I'm going to try and describe the image that you submitted. So I'm reading this off my phone. I think about death often. Maybe I like deadlines. Some paintings I want to be interesting enough to leave behind when my ship has sailed. A painting that says Eleanor was here. Painting is a journey, a game of chicken, learning to trust yourself. How far can I push this? Does it still feel like my work? The problem with being a painter is that your work can straddle worlds that could potentially be detrimental to your practice, a commercial black hole that can suck you in if you let it. The painting is a nod, and this is the painting that you submitted, is a nod to Bowie's last album, knowing he was dying and preparing to walk his black star. The intensity and beautiful desperation of it reminds me how I felt watching Melancholia by Lars von Trier. So the image you submitted, and in this thing kind of we're always depending on audio because I don't like showing video. I don't know why. I think it makes artists maybe freer. Because when you're recorded as an image, sometimes you're less open or something like that. So But then we have to describe this image because we don't have a visual of it. Usually I do a detail of it or something, a kind of screen print of it that is monochrome, but it is a colourful image. And it's an image that you named Thought I Was There 2021. So it's from 5 years ago. It's gouache and paper. It's 30 by 40 centimetres. And you present it, it looks like it's on the ground somewhere. It has a white margin around it. And it looks like a landscape. These are the kind of landscapes I've been thinking about recently. And it goes back to what you were saying about retreating away from deadlines. Like I've been thinking about deserts and stuff recently. And kind of an eagerness to... I went on an RV trip 2 years in a row in America. And I kind of really loved it. I never knew I thought I'd like deserts. But there was something about the desert that was, just freeing. So in this image, there's a landscape. There looks like it's quite symbolic, quite surreal. There's a person or a silhouette of a person lying on a bed. They're green. Just kind of, it feels like extraterrestrial a little bit, like the Nevada desert or something, like Area 51 or something like that. But then it does also feel there's these animals in it as well. They look like pig hogs. Maybe they have those tusks. There's a plant in the corner. There's these waveforms, water and desert. And it looks like a sunset maybe. There's 3 of those pig hog forms. They're kind of silhouetted as well. There's a table. There's a bed sheet with wavy stripes. So it's quite, it feels not outsidery because it has a kind of perspective in it. And it doesn't feel flat as such. There's a kind of dimension in it, but lots of colour. And I suppose talk a little bit about this image and why you decided to submit this image, and then the text in relation to that, because it opens up really with a big question of death, and then it kind of smooths that off with a joke. Maybe I like deadlines, so he kind of like I think about death often. Maybe I like deadlines. There's a kind of belittling of that big question. Or not belittling, but a kind of, there's death and then deadlines and then you're doing the bursary, Annie, do you want to respond to that?
I know there's a lot in that. And also there's a lot in it from the time I made that painting to now. There's definitely I feel more light-hearted about it now, because when I made it, it was 2021, so I think we were all kind of locked down and not locked down, and I was in between studios and going into Palace Studios, and so that painting is from a series of gouaches that I did in the house here I rent. And at the time I was recovering from operations that I had for endometriosis, and up to that point, we really, myself, my husband, really wanted kids, and with the endometriosis, it was, I was beginning to realize how infertile I was because of the endo. So anyway, I had an operation, and the operation went terribly wrong, and so it left me with sepsis. And so I was lying at home in between surgeries. I was lying at home, and like my legs were beginning to swell. My body was beginning to swell, and I was turning this really weird kind of a greeny blue white kind of the blood. It was like the blood was just like turning toxic. Excuse me. Sorry. Um yeah, so I kind of lay there thinking of nature. you know, like how I would just love to like get up out of the bed and walk in nature in the forest or walk in on the beach, and just feel the air. And so um I was having these really weird kind of like not delusions, but I felt like I wasn't really present. It was strange. And then afterwards, I went into the hospital. They put me on like tons of drugs, and they operated and fixed me up. But when I look back in it, I kind of think, like, was I dying? Like what? Like I think I was, and it's and it's funny because I come from such a religious family, and I had this conversation with my dad afterwards, and I said to him, I didn't pray. Like, I like it's taken me so long to try and convince them that I don't believe in an afterlife, because that's what they're all about. Like, and I was saying, I didn't. I think he always thought that, like, in an emergency, I would turn to God or something, because it's so hard to convince them that, like, I don't believe in anything. It's hard for them to understand. So when I said that, Dad, when I was in that situation, I didn't turn to God and pray and say, help me. I felt very human, I felt very grounded for the first time, like that I was like flesh and blood. And it was kind of like freeing a bit, so then I think those paintings kind of came out of that real serious time. And I think for me as an artist, I use imagery, I use film to kind of ground my ideas and to borrow from, maybe to give me a bit of support or something, And like my work is quite visceral, like it's all about emotion and feeling. Yeah, so that's where that it's a long-winded story, but that's where that came from. It's based on a manuscript that was written by this Dominican friar in the 13th century, and it was almost like one of the first encyclopedias. He wrote about the world and what he knew of the world, and this painting is based on this little illustration in that manuscript. It's about these demonic pigs attacking this this monk that was like in bed. I don't know if they're trying to possess him or what, but I kind of loved it.
Wow, there's a lot there, isn't there? And there's a lot of ways in which we can talk about this, because like when I was looking at your work over the last week or more, and I've seen your work in person many times, in both in collaborations, in group shows, and solo shows, and like, I suppose my first question is really, like, when you go through a traumatic experience like that, does the work change? Because you say in the text about, is this my work? You know, you ask that question in the text, is this my work? And when I've been looking at your work, when it first emerged back in, for me anyway, visibly, like 2017, around that time, I saw your work as quite graphic, but quite related to photography in a kind of weird way. It was quite illusionistic. Had these gradients of color, had this perspective. It had form. It was very much about forms and textures and bodies and tinfoil and like, it was quite impressive actually visually. And it was impressive visually also as a digital image today on the internet. Like when you bring up some of your work from 2016, 17, as a digital image, you know, as you compress it down into that size, it looks very, it's kind of really related to photography or photorealism, but kind of abstracted and strange. And the kind of, the trajectory of your work, from my perspective from the outside, is it went from this place that was very impressive and it was getting lots of attention. You were getting lots of shows. And then it changed a little bit. It kind of shifted into this more textured, it was less about illusion. Like when you start to put it all together, it's really complex. And when you give that story about this traumatic experience and the religiosity of behind it, you know, that's really interesting. Those reference points, like there's something how it changes, it shifts away from that space, that detached mode of painting, which is still surreal, it's still dreamy, it still has this kind of spirituality in a weird way, but it's different. It's kind of more about it coming out. Because one of the more recent shows I saw, I think it was Solstice? What's that up in Cavan or Navan?
Yeah.
It was much more you walked into it, you know.
Was that the paper installation? Was it?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe the quick way of, you know, that went all over the place, but really, this idea of you, especially from the text, you talk about, is this my work? Do you see something shifting there in your work that was probably accelerated, or was it already changing during that time? That moment where all that, you know, trauma was happening.
Yeah. I could see the trajectory. I could see I was getting attention for that work. Like, you know, especially like international, you know, galleries started picking up my work. I was working with that curator, Sasha Jeff. I can't pronounce the second name. Sasha. I've worked with him like a couple of times since then, but I do think my work was, I don't know, like, I don't know if you can call an image or a piece of art like catchy, like, you know, like a pop tune, you know. Yeah, it was graphic, which is interesting because, you know, I studied graphic design. I was a designer first, and interesting because my tutors really tried to knock that design out of me. You know, they kept on saying, Eleanor, stop thinking like a designer. You're thinking about the finished product. A product. You know, it says it all, really. And I feel like people really wanted to buy those paintings. And for me, it almost became like a product or something, you know? And initially, I think those paintings were about painting as well. It was like, how can I render this to make it look like something that you want to touch, you know? But I think painting became, after I found out I couldn't have children, in my head for such a long time, I was going to be this mother, you know, and that was going to be, I think that was going to be a big part of my identity, you know, in the future, like this like imagined future. And when that wasn't a possibility, I think I was like, I want to be an artist, you know, not just like a painter who paints these paintings that people want to buy. I think it kind of just became this weird thing. It's like, what is commercial? What is identity? You know, and maybe I try to absorb more of like a lifestyle, as in throw myself into my work, and like, if I'm not going to be a mother, well then what am I? Am I an artist? Am I a painter? Who am I? And so I'm still always, I mean, we're always looking for who we are, you know. But I think that was a real turning point for me.
So, how to respond to that? Like, listen, thanks for being so open with this. I suppose, like, my main question, and maybe kind of look back at your text again. Like, you talk about music in this, and you talk about David Bowie and the album Black Star, and this idea of the intensity and beautiful desperation of it, of this image of Black Star, and then of Melancholia by Lars von Trier. They're all dealing with the same kind of subject matter, in a sense, that kind of impending something on the horizon, and kind of anticipating and waiting for it. And they have a certain tone. Like, when you retold that story about 2021 and all the stuff that you were going through, and then all the layers, like this kind of religious background, and this idea of the afterlife, and how anticipation of the afterlife, you know, all this kind of real complexity of that, especially when you're in a situation where you're thinking about these things in a very intense way because of illness. Like, are these, you know, I spoke about this earlier, are these paintings, are they spiritual paintings? Are they paintings that, you know, religion, I've always found religion interesting because I grew up in rural Ireland and everyone went to church on Sunday. And at that time as a child, I didn't know, it was present all the time. There wasn't a question of belief. It was it was a thing you did on Sunday. You listened to this person at the top of this church, this really impressive architecture, with these sermons and this ritual, and it became just very normal, like anything else, like going to play football. There was no questioning of whether, there was no deep questioning really Sometimes you would have questions, but it was just really something that happened casually in everyday life. And I know when my mother passed when I was just a teenager, I began to all of a sudden that normality became I started to question it. I did start to question the afterlife, you know, because I think when you experience things that are traumatic, then the normalcy of all the stuff that goes around all the time becomes um, you're questioning the why of it starts to crop up, and either you get more religious, you become, or you reject it wholeheartedly in some way. I rejected it as it as in that part of my life. I rejected it, but I hadn't really accepted it in the first place. Because it was just there. It was present. Um, but it was a wholehearted rejection of this belief system for something else. And then I found that maybe in art, especially years later, art became a kind of weird religion in a weird way, you know?
Big time. Yeah. I think that's what
Yeah,
happened to me.
yeah,
Yeah, like
okay.
my studio became my church. You know, making work began to be my prayer. All these things like the ritual of going in and lighting a candle and it's like going into the studio and putting on music. You know what I mean? It's a ritual. Like it's my church, it's my religion. It really is. And I miss that belief. That because my family are still there. They're still there in that belief, like very much so. Like my sister is a theologian. She did her doctorate on the Virgin Mary. Like she's her number one fan, like she's like the pinnacle of how a woman should be, like immaculate and virtuous, like how can anyone live up to that, as a teenager, especially like anytime my parents left the house, be good, be good. you know like I think I was a bit of a black sheep, maybe, I don't know. But I paved the way for my younger sister. Yeah. And she was a nun for a while, She was in the Carmelites, and it was an enclosed order, so I think it was hard on my parents that they couldn't see her. But she got really ill and she came out of the convent, and she did her doctorate and she became a theologian. Now she's teaching priests in Birmingham. So that's her. And then I have another sister I mean, they're all very religious. Um, and she studied textiles in NCAD. When she was making a lot of liturgical art, she was really into Imogen Stewart. And I don't think NCAD, they nearly failed her, because maybe it was too literal or something. I don't know. But like, there's that really like it's serious, serious faith in my family. And with that faith comes along, you know, very opposing political views, opposing to me, you know. Sometimes it can be difficult to have a good relationship, with people who have the complete different mindset to you. But I suppose, they have to respect me and I have to respect them. So it goes both ways. We all see the world quite differently, but we have to respect each other as well. I mean, sometimes, I can really fly off the handle when I hear shit that they say. But at the end of the day, like, who's going to be at your deathbed You know, it's not going to be your colleagues in work, like, you know.
It's interesting. Like I'm just trying to think about your imagery in relation to religion, and do you find them like we talked about earlier about your earlier work. So it's quite pristine. Um, there's something about when you reject something, it does transplant itself into the work a little bit. You're in your rejection. It kind of, because I know after I experienced that death in my family, I became very obsessed, like your sister, with the Madonna. And I had a weird, scary thought that religion made me into an artist. Weirdly, you know, because in my rejection of it, and even though it was normal and it wasn't something I rejected, it was just everyday kind of stuff in the air. When I rejected it, it became more real in a weird way. And it kind of, because in that, usually it's like love and hate, it's one of those cliches, but it's kind of when you reject something like that, it somehow transplants itself into the work, but in an abstract way. Um, and that's where the artist comes in the case of, abstracting it in some form, but then accepting it in a different form. Like when people, like it's asking this really difficult question about what do people see in your work, and when you give away all this stuff, this background, the biography of the artist, and a lot of people now, artists, I was talking about this with Sarah Long before, and she was talking about how she finds some biographies cringy because they're either fake or they're either institutional, kind of, they've got all these plaudits, either funding or awards or, commercial, you know, stuff. Or they're kind of biographical in the sense that they're about the artist, the environment in which they grew up, or and how that transformed them, in some way. And do you find your work, I'm learning so much through this conversation of where your work is coming from, and it changes my it's changing the work as I hear you talking about it, because in a good way, because I have certain things about spirituality and now I can attach to the work in some way. So when you start to learn that stuff, but would you put that into your biography about, like, I don't know if I have read some of your artist statements and shows, but they haven't transmitted the same stuff. And artist statements never do, really, because they're 200 words, whatever. So yeah, like it goes back to what you were saying about religious art and your sister in NCAD and the literalism of it. Because religious art is about being literal. It is about speaking to the people in a very, not being jargonistic, not being abstract. Um, so I know there's a lot going on there. This is how I think. I just think in mad tangents and it just goes absolutely everywhere. But so as what I'm getting to is this idea of biography. I'm really interested in artist biographies. Probably why I'm interested in doing these conversations, because I want to know what's going on behind the work. Do you think that, because you spoke earlier about graphic design and being a product, and then your artworks feeling that they were products, and now there's something a little bit different for lots of reasons. So I don't know what you can take from those observations. There's no real question there, but really it is about biography and about telling these stories about the artwork. Has that changed your appreciation of other artists, learning about them?
Yeah, I think with my work, like you said there, when you were talking there, when you're thinking about art and you're thinking about you're talking to me and you said, I'm going off, and the way your mind works, it goes off in tangents. It's exactly the way my mind works. I can't pinpoint exactly what one work or a series of works is fully about. That's probably why when I write about an artist statement, or even for each show is a different tangent. I mean, it's all from the same sphere, but like it's picking apart different parts of tangents and trying to solidify it in a body of work, if you get me. So let's say, for the RHA show, again, I made installation works, I made paintings, but that was all about the sea and that beach that I dreamt of when I was sick. And it's this place that I go up in Donegal. It's lovely. It's just so vast and so open that you feel like you're on the edge of the world, So that was kind of about that. And it was also having like these disagreements with my sister up there. Like when if I go up with family, you're in this place and it's quite isolated and you're having these conversations and it's really difficult. Like there's some of the paintings is one where like one sister is cutting the other sister's hair, and it's like your hair as a woman can be seen as this like real feminine thing, and like for one feminine in the family to like cut the other feminine cut their hair, it was like this kind of like the cutting words, it's my way of kind of dealing with how things are, or situations, or how things go down in just on a day to day. So that show, there's a lot in the paintings as well. So I was thinking about the myths of women around the sea, like the mermaids and the sirens, and how, like, I come from a traditional family where the men in my family didn't go to college. Like, I remember my poor brother wanted to go to the rock school in Ballyfermot, and my dad was like, if you don't get in, you have to cut your hair and you have to come and work for me. So there's that a little bit kind of a patriarchal structure. So I'm always kind of questioning that as well. Whereas like the women, we were allowed to go to art college. It was seen as, and like my sister and my mom are, they haven't done it in since COVID, but they're iconographers. So they would paint the pictures of saints, and it's very traditional. They pray between each layer and they mix their paints, and it's like a ritual. See, I'm going off on a tangent now as well. Yeah, so what am I trying to say? Oh yeah. So each show is about where I am at that moment, and it's a questioning. It's a questioning of identity. It's a questioning of what it is to be a woman today, and it's a questioning of being an artist and how to navigate, opposing views to other people. Like, it's funny, like, sometimes I forget, like, I surround myself I'm in a bubble with these people who think similarly to me, Like, artists generally think the same or have the same views on things. And you forget that until I go home, and then I hear what they're talking about. And you know, like, I love them so much, but yeah, they do make me kind of realize that, like, the world is quite divisive, and especially at the moment, like, yeah, so that's what my work is about. It's kind of about so many things. I mean, I could describe each painting and what it's about, but and it's hard to, like, capture that in one paragraph.
Do you like? I asked this of Kira Roach. Kira Roach was giving a talk down in Wexford Arts Centre very recently, and I brought students there. And I asked her a question. It was a really good talk, and it was very open about the sources for her work. And they really come from spaces of either similar spaces to where you're coming from, like how the body is represented, female body is represented, and how all this consumer culture, like going into brown tiles, she did those paintings of Smeg toasters, of Smeg
Yeah.
fridges, because she wanted one. But she kind of was angry at the idea of wanting one, because you were meant to want one, so she painted them. And I asked her, like, and so there's a lot of rage in her work, and cynicism about capitalism and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of asked her, do you feel better after painting them? And she said, yeah. You just give it right. I feel better after painting then.
Yeah.
So there was this kind of, sublimation, or kind of some kind of way of working through the process of painting that gave her relief in some way. And then she could move on to the next painting, and I so on. So it's kind of interesting. I know you said earlier, and this has come up in conversations before as well, with other painters actually, that some painters call themselves painters and some painters call themselves artists. And they're very direct about that. I was even listening to a conversation with Mama Anderson and her husband, Nordstrom. Forget his first name. But they're doing a conversation together, and she introduces herself as a painter, and he introduces himself as an artist. And it was kind of really interesting, the distinction, because he paints as well, and he does other things. But maybe it's the other things. But I'm just, it's the other stuff, So so it's kind of asking you about that, like, this idea, because you mentioned yourself as an artist, but maybe you were a painter before, when you were painting those illusionistic, photographic, beautiful objects, you can see them as being very covetable, as you said yourself, so I'm just wondering, where you stand in relation to that, this idea of being a painter or being an artist. Because when I see you, I probably would say a lot of the work you've made, I kind of say you're part of painting or painting group, because you emerged as a painter. So, but I don't really have any distinction between those terms. But I like asking the question, Radley, more than anything,
Yeah, but it's an interesting one. Like, it's weird. Yeah, it's. I think maybe you said, like, doing other things. Maybe that's kind of, because if someone asks you what actually, if someone who isn't really into art goes, "What do you do?" If you said, "I'm an artist," they probably, I don't know, they probably picture someone with a beret sitting around. Or I don't know, like. Whereas if you say I'm a painter, they'd be like, oh, okay. Because they can, it depends on who's asking, maybe,
Yes.
you know? An artist, I think maybe the reason I said painter to artist was maybe painting those old paintings is very technical. And it's quite laborious, but like beautiful, a lovely way of working. Like, but it's almost like, because I was painting from photographs, because I had to get photographs of like I was pouring paint over these little maquettes, and I'd light them up and get these kind of glistening effects, and so I would like capture that. And then if it got to the point where if I felt like I was painting by numbers, and I felt, okay, well, I can do this. I can paint now. Okay, what else? Now, it also that I listened to an interview with Mike Kelly, and he said, if you ever get stuck, go back to your childhood drawings. So I did, and I found this drawing that I made when I was about 6 or 7, and it was one of those, wax resist drawings where you do the crayons and you put the gouache over and it kind of spreads. And that changed my whole practice. Like, whole practice. And like that wasn't even really that. I think maybe that in my head that's not painting, because that was the template for the rest of my paintings, that childhood drawing during COVID. And maybe after that the painting that I sent you, the gouache, started doing crayons underneath everything and then a wash over it. And then I started painting in between the drawing lines. So that's why it almost looks like a Bonnard. If you look at them quite closely, you'll have one color down, which is usually the drawing, and then I'll slot in another color with paint or something in between, but I'll usually play with the complementary color. So like I'll put the complementary color down. Like if I'm painting a tree, let's say, I'll put down the green drawing, like line work. It could be with an oil pastel, it could be with an oil stick, it could be with a crayon, just depends. And then to darken it up, I'll use the complementary color, the red. If you stand back, then it looks like a shadowed green area. But if I want it brighter, I'll fill in around the green, I'll fill in like a yellow, or like a lime green, or or even like a lighter green. Yeah. So maybe I don't feel like a traditional painter. Maybe that's it, because I'm not doing the layers, the glazing, that da da da. I'm changing all the time. Maybe that's why I'm calling myself an artist now, because I can use my imagination more and I'm not just drafting something, maybe.
That's brilliant. Like you mentioned Mike Kelly there. Like I think I read in an interview somewhere with you, you mentioned Mike Kelly as a turning point in your work. What is it about? Not just what he said, but what is about it? Because I'm a very big fan of Mike Kelly. So, what is it about his work that changed your perspective and changed your work?
I think it was the honesty with religion, probably, as well. And how his work, it manifests in so many different ways, like little performances, and I think as well the connection with Sonic Youth. I think that really helped because I really like music. Um, and I feel like he deals with um pop culture, religion, or he dealt with um yeah, and yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think maybe that's it. Like, and I'm like a massive fan of like Mark Fisher, and I'm a big fan of like Elliot Smith, and I just think it's really interesting that like all of them ended their own lives, you know, in such a desperate way, and they created such beautiful work, you know? It's that idea maybe of death and thinking about death. I don't know. I don't know.
Mm. Yeah, like we've come for full circle back to this idea of death. Like I always question that because I would, when I'm teaching in psychoanalysis and art, I bring up Mike Kelly a lot. I found out one year that a lot of the artists I talk about in that course took their lives, weirdly. And I got really concerned about this because I said, like, what is it do I see in their work that makes sense in terms of what I'm trying to discuss, you know? And there is something about Kelly, like he's quite bold, especially in his earlier years. He's kind of a radical, but he's quite bold. Like, I mean, naughty in another way as well. And he
Yeah.
and he's always trying to go against, but then he's very thoughtful. Like he wrote this text, playing with dead animals or something, and really long, like really big paper. And he talks about Freud. Like he reads all these. It was interesting when I came across him. Everyone was thinking about Slavoj Žižek, and I had already read Freud. I'd read Freud years ago, when I was quite young, just accidentally, really. Didn't know anything about him. And but when I went into art college, people were talking about Zizek, and I was going, "This is just Freud stuff, you know." And when I came across Mike Kelly, he was completely embraced Freud. Now he's questioning him all the time, but he was reading him. And the relationship with religion, of course, because psychoanalysis starts to, mess with that. Feminism with psychoanalysis, all these things started to connect. So, yeah, when you brought up Mike Kelly, I was really interested because it's very different. It kind of reflects your current work more. Mike Kelly kind of influence that it's like his stuff with teddy bears and his stuff, there's a texture to it all. So, yeah, that. Um, I suppose, like, usually I finish these conversations about talking about, or asking you, artists, and we're kind of covering covering that now, Mike Kelly. But is there any artists that really influence you, or have, or that you
Mm.
can name? I know
Um,
Mike Kelly.
yeah, Mike Kelly. Paul Tech really did. Um, Maybe it's that kind of elusiveness. Um, I suppose painter probably. Peter Doig probably was like like such a massive thing for me. Um, and I when I listen to a really good album, I can get really emotional. Like I can almost cry. Like and it that doesn't happen to me with art really. And the only time I ever cried was when I stood in front of a Peter Doig painting in the Walker Gallery, and it was I think is it called Echoes? can't remember, but it's that guy at the edge of the lake, and he's like, I think it's based on like Friday the 13th or like a horror movie. Um, and I did my whole thesis. Well, I did my thesis actually on the uncanny, so Freud, but it was the uncanny in the uncanny in painting and film, or it was more like the uncanny forest. So it was like the idea that things can happen in forests, um but we don't, is it really happening, or is it not happening, or are we imagining it happening because it's in a forest? So I took one of Peter Doig's paintings, you know, the one of the Corbusier um apartments that were, I think they were abandoned maybe in Germany for a while, and then so it's in the National Gallery, that painting, and it's surrounded by forest. And I just thought it was interesting, this kind of idea of like the Corbusier, like you know, High Rise, that the book, uh what's his name, Ballard, that idea of like a utopian way of living in these purpose built apartments for like a great life, you know. And then Freud, or he Doig depicts it, it's just so epic, and then you see kind of like the forest kind of creeping in, kind of creeping around it. Like, I that was kind of the kickstart for me, and like reading Freud and like trying to make sense of how I feel about things, you know. And Freud was the one who really sealed the deal for me of like the idea of like, I can't remember what book it was in, but it was like to do with ghosts maybe. And he explained it, how the mind can manifest a presence or something. And that's what really kind of set me on the path to kind of to art, really, because I discovered him in college, but I went back as a mature student. So like, so Peter Doig really, and then David Lynch, the idea of like Twin Peaks and the Black Lodge in the forest, that kind of uncanny thing. I just love that. Like, yeah. So Doig and Lynch.